Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller, and I'm here to guide you into a night of eerie tales and deep sleep. I know you use this video to unwind, so before you drift off, tap that like button and subscribe for more chilling stories. Also, drop a comment, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the stories take over.
The house that waits in silence. The rain whispered against the earth in soft, ceaseless murmurs, a lullaby that had no beginning and no end. It had been falling for hours, stretching the night into something endless, something weightless, as if time itself had unraveled and drifted apart in the dark. Alara drove slowly, her hands resting lightly on the wheel, her body wrapped in the warmth of the car's steady hum. The road ahead shimmered under the rain, winding through an expanse of towering trees, their shadows long and patient. She wasn't lost. No, she had followed the directions precisely, but the night seemed to fold around her, stretching the journey further than it should have been. The house was waiting. She had seen it before, of course. The listing had been simple, almost cryptic, a sprawling, forgotten mansion on the outskirts of a nameless town, untouched by time, untouched by people. It called to her in a way she couldn't explain, its empty halls and shadowed windows stirring something deep in her chest. Alara wasn't afraid. She was drawn. The gravel whispered beneath the tires as she pulled into the long, winding driveway. The house loomed before her, its silhouette painted against the storm-heavy sky. 3 stories tall, wrapped in ivy and night. It stood as if waiting for something, someone. She stepped out, the air thick with the scent of rain and damp earth. The key was in her pocket, cold against her palm, but she hesitated before climbing the steps to the grand wooden door. The house was quiet, impossibly so. The rain did not touch it, nor did the wind. It was a place apart from the world, wrapped in its own silence. She turned the key, the door side open. Warmth met her, unexpected and soft, like the breath of something just woken from a long sleep. The entryway stretched into dimly lit corridors, their walls lined with aged wallpaper, curling at the edges like old parchment. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness, its steps untouched by dust. The house was not abandoned. It had simply been waiting. Alara exhaled, her breath slow, measured. She felt no fear, only the strange sensation of stepping into something that had always belonged to her, even if she had never set foot here before. She moved forward, her footsteps hushed by thick carpets, her fingers grazing the cool wood of the banister. A sound drifted through the stillness. A whisper. No, not a whisper. A sigh. Soft, distant, familiar. Alara turned, her pulse steady but deep, thrumming in her wrists, her throat. The house was listening. And somewhere above her, in the hush of the upper floors, someone else was breathing. The air inside the house felt thick, weighty. Alara stood in the dim glow of the chandelier, its golden light swaying ever so slightly, as if disturbed by a breath too faint to feel. The sigh she had heard, or imagined, still lingered in her chest, curling around her ribs like fingers brushing against bone. She turned her head slowly, letting the silence settle around her. The house smelled of old wood and time, but beneath it, something softer. Lavender? No, something richer, something warm and just barely sweet. It made her think of skin, of warmth, of the space between wakefulness and sleep when bodies press together, exhaling in unison. Her fingers trailed along the wooden railing of the grand staircase as she moved forward. The house stretched upward, the second floor landing disappearing into darkness. A place like this should have been filled with dust, but the air felt clean, lived in. She ascended, her pulse steady, her body moving without hesitation. Each step was met with the slightest give in the wood, as though the house was adjusting beneath her weight, sighing in return. When she reached the landing, the darkness wrapped around her like velvet. The hallway ahead stretched into shadows, lined with closed doors, each one waiting, each one silent. And then, a shift. Not movement, not sound, but something in the air. A presence. Alara's breath deepened, slow and controlled. She wasn't afraid. Not yet. Her fingers brushed against the nearest door. It was warm, not cool like untouched would should be, but warm, as if someone had leaned against it, pressed their palm to it just before she arrived. She turned the handle. The door whispered open, revealing a bedroom bathed in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through heavy curtains. The bed was vast, covered in deep, rich fabric, the kind that invited touch, that promised warmth. An ornate fireplace stood against the far wall, unlit, but still carrying the faint scent of burned wood, as if a fire had died here not long ago. Alara stepped inside. The air shifted again, wrapping around her, sliding over her skin like a touch so delicate it might have been imagined. The door closed behind her, not by her hand. She turned slowly, but the room remained still. No breeze, no movement, only the heavy hush of night pressing in, filling the space between moments. She exhaled, releasing the tension she hadn't realized she was holding. And then the bed moved. Not a full shift, not the weight of someone rising, but something, a slight indentation in the blankets, a breath of motion just enough to be seen in the moonlight. Alara stilled. The warmth in the room deepened. Her skin prickled, not with fear, but with something else, something slower, something darker. The space beside the indentation was untouched, as if something, someone, lay there, waiting, watching. Alara's breath came slow and deep. Not fear, not yet. She took a step forward, the silence stretching around her, wrapping around her ankles like soft ribbons. And then, just as she reached the bed, a voice, soft, low, right beside her ear. "You came back." Alara shivered. She had never been here before. Had she? The voice had not come from across the room. It had come from the bed. She turned her head, slowly, carefully, to the space beside her. The blankets remained undisturbed, almost. The slightest impression, the smallest shift, a presence just beyond sight. Alara's pulse was steady, but deeper now, thrumming in her throat, her wrists between her thighs. Not fear, something else. She exhaled. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, a touch. Not physical, not quite, but something, an awareness, sliding against her, brushing along the edges of her skin without ever touching. A presence. Familiar. Deep in her chest, something stirred, something slow and ancient. She had never been here before. Had she? The scent in the air deepened. Warm, dark, intoxicating. A whisper of something forgotten, yet intimate. The voice came again, a murmur against her skin. "Lie down, Alara." She did not ask how it knew her name. She did not leave. She only lowered herself onto the bed. The house exhaled around her. And in the quiet, in the hush of the night, something unseen moved closer. The bed was warm. Alara lay still, her body sinking into the softness, her breath deep and steady. The room held its silence like something sacred, wrapping around her, pressing against her skin. The presence beside her had not left. It had not moved. And yet, she could feel it, just beyond the veil of sight. She exhaled, slow, measured, letting herself melt into the stillness. The sensation was strange, not frightening, but thick with something unspoken. The air itself seemed to press against her, warm and watchful, as if the space beside her was no longer empty. Something, someone, was here, but they did not touch her. Not yet. The weight of the unseen presence coiled through the room, stretching out in the darkness, pressing against the edges of her awareness. She could feel it like a slow-moving current rushing against her without making contact, just enough to be felt, just enough to stir something deep, slow, and ancient. Her heartbeat pulsed beneath her skin, not in fear, but in something else, anticipation. She turned her head, just slightly, her cheek pressing into the pillow. The space beside her had changed. She saw it in the way the sheets curved, the way the shadows bent. The air carried a weight that had not been there before, a presence just barely tangible, but undeniably real. She did not move away. She did not speak. She only breathed. The air shifted, a whisper of warmth, not from her own body. Something unseen, something impossibly close. Her skin prickled, not with fear. The presence beside her did not speak again, but she could feel it breathing. Slow, measured, like something waiting, like something remembering. A slow shiver rolled through her body, heat unfurling in her chest, trailing down her spine. The weight of the moment pressed into her, sinking deeper, settling inside her bones. And then, a touch. Not flesh, not solid, but there, a breath of warmth against her wrist, just barely enough to register. A sensation without weight, a whisper of something brushing against her skin like the memory of a touch. She inhaled, sharp and quiet. The presence shifted. It was watching. She did not run. She did not close her eyes. The warmth deepened, sliding over her skin, curling around her like a tide lapping at the shore. Slow, patient, waiting. Her fingers curled against the sheets, the fabric cool beneath her fingertips. The contrast sent a quiet shudder through her body, her breath catching in her throat. "Who are you?" she whispered. Silence, but not emptiness. The weight of the presence was heavier now, pressing closer, though it never quite touched. Then, a voice, soft, low. It did not come from beside her. It came from within her. "You know me." Her breath stilled. A pulse of warmth curled around her throat, sliding lower, barely there, just a ghost of a sensation. Alara's fingers tightened in the sheets. Something was waking inside her. Something she did not understand, and she did not want it to stop. The presence moved then, not away, but closer. Not touching, but close enough to feel. The space between them shrank, the air thick with something hungry, ancient, and knowing. Her pulse thrummed in her throat, in her wrists, lower. The warmth in the room deepened. And then, the presence exhaled. The breath of something unseen curled against her neck, sinking into her skin, wrapping around her like a whisper that did not need words. She did not move. She did not breathe. She only felt. And in the hush of the house, in the silence that stretched and sighed, something pressed into her skin, something deeper than touch, something she could not name. She had never been here before. Had she? The house exhaled, and in the quiet, the presence did not leave. It only waited, and so did she. The room had not changed. The moonlight still spilled through the heavy curtains, casting silvered shadows along the wooden floor. The fireplace remained cold, its scent of old smoke lingering like a memory. The air was thick, but it did not move. The silence pressed in from every corner, wrapping around Alara in a way that was almost intimate. And yet, she was no longer alone. The presence beside her had not disappeared. It had settled, deepened. She could feel it not just in the air, not just in the hush that stretched between heartbeats, but within herself. It had moved inside her. The warmth curled along her skin like a thought she could not shake, a weightless touch that lingered without form. It was not physical, but it was there. She could feel it. It knew her. "You know me." The words had not faded. They had sunk deeper, slipping into her like something remembered too late. Alara exhaled, slow and deliberate. Her body was still, but the warmth was spreading. It trailed along the curve of her throat, just beneath the skin. She could feel it, the way it pulsed like a second heartbeat, sinking lower, curling around her ribs, sliding down her spine in slow, deliberate waves. Her fingers curled against the sheets, gripping the fabric. Not in fear, but in something else. Anticipation. The presence did not touch her. Not in any way she could see. But she felt it. The sensation was impossible. Heat without weight, pressure without mass. Like something unseen was tracing its way over her skin. Something curious, patient, waiting. Alara's breath came deeper now, slower. She could feel it everywhere. A warmth against the side of her neck. A whisper of something at her wrist. A slow, steady pressure along the curve of her waist, sliding lower, spreading across her stomach, her hips. Not hands, not fingers, but something else. Something that made her shudder, the breath catching in her throat. Lie down, Alara. She already had, but the voice was inside her now. Not in her ears, not in the room, but deeper, filling the spaces between her thoughts. The presence shifted. It did not move away. It surrounded her. The sensation grew stronger, pressing into her in ways she did not understand, did not know how to fight. Did not want to fight. Her pulse thrummed in her wrists, in her throat, lower. She had never been here before. Had she? The warmth deepened. It did not ask permission. It did not need to. Alara's fingers dug into the sheets as the unseen touch wrapped around her, pressing her deeper into the mattress, pulling her in. She let it. She wanted to. The house was breathing, and now so was she. The presence did not leave her. It had no shape, no body, no weight, yet she could feel it. It was not a trick of the mind, not some lingering ghost of a dream. No, this was something real. It pressed against her in ways she did not understand, in ways she could not see. And it was waiting. The warmth coiled around her, sinking deeper. It traced the lines of her body, wrapping around her wrists, sliding against her throat, slipping lower in slow, deliberate waves. Not hands, not flesh. Something older, something intimate. Her breath stilled. Her fingers tightened against the sheets. She should have been afraid. She was not. The weight of the unseen touch curled against her stomach, pressing down, holding her there. Not to restrain. No, this was something gentler, something darker, something more possessive. She could feel it now, truly feel it. The way it moved over her without ever touching. The way it whispered against her skin like a forgotten memory. And the way it knew her. You know me, the words had never left her. Had she been here before? Had she dreamed this place, this presence, this feeling long before she ever stepped foot in the house? The warmth thickened. It slid over her hips, along the insides of her thighs, tracing paths that made her breath hitch, that made her ache. Not fear, not anymore. The presence did not force. It did not rush. It simply waited, sliding against her, sinking into her, watching her body react with slow, deliberate patience. It was in the walls, in the air, inside her. The house itself seemed to breathe, and she breathed with it, sinking into something deeper, something endless. Her pulse throbbed in her throat, in her wrists between her thighs. The warmth grew heavier, pressing, waiting, a whisper of pressure against her lips, the ghost of a kiss that was not a kiss. She shuddered, and then the presence spoke, not aloud, inside her. You were always mine. She exhaled, her body trembling with something slow, something inevitable. She did not pull away. She did not resist. She only let go. And in the hush of the house, in the quiet between moments, Alara surrendered. The presence settled over her, around her, inside her. It was not a single touch, but many. Not a single breath, but a tide, rolling in slow and steady waves, pulling her deeper. Alara's body no longer resisted. There was nothing to resist. Only warmth, only weightless pressure, curling around her throat, sliding down the arch of her spine, pressing into the spaces between skin and soul. Her breath was slow, steady, drawn into the rhythm of something older than time itself. The house did not creak, did not groan. It did not protest her presence because she had always belonged here. Hadn't she? The sheets beneath her were impossibly soft, her body sinking into them, lost in their depths. The warmth that surrounded her did not fade. It deepened, settled into her bones, tracing the outlines of her ribs, her hips, her thighs. Not touching, not quite, but there, watching, waiting. It moved like silk against her, sliding over her skin, never quite breaking the barrier of reality, never quite solidifying into something real. And yet, she felt it. Her fingers curled. A sigh escaped her lips, unbidden, barely more than a breath. The presence responded. The warmth pressed. Not hard, not rough, but deliberate. A slow, patient weight against her stomach, rolling down, dragging its heat over her skin like a whisper of something inevitable. Alara's body reacted. She felt it in the tightening of her breath, in the slow, aching pulse at her core. She was being consumed, not devoured. No, this was worship. The house exhaled around her as she sighed with it. The warmth pulsed deeper, curling around her thighs, sliding between them in soft, unseen strokes. Her breath caught. Her back arched just barely. The presence did not push further. It did not need to. It simply let her feel it. Let her surrender to the heat, to the unseen weight of something that had always been waiting for her. She had never been here before. Had she? The warmth curled around her throat like a phantom kiss, a whisper of possession. You were always mine. Alara shuddered. She did not run. She did not fight. She only let go. And the house, the presence, the unseen weight that filled the space between her breaths. It did not stop. It only held her closer, waiting, watching, knowing this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The house no longer felt unfamiliar. The presence no longer felt separate from her. Alara did not move. She only breathed, and the house breathed with her. The air was thick, warm, and pressing, settling into her skin like something living, something unseen, something that had been waiting far longer than she could ever understand. Her body felt weightless and heavy all at once, like she was sinking, like she was being pulled in. The warmth wrapped around her throat, down her chest, trailing lower in slow, patient strokes, brushing against her ribs, her stomach, her thighs. Not hands, not flesh, something deeper, something that did not need form to touch her. The unseen pressure curled at her hips, dipping lower, barely there, but enough. She shuddered. The presence knew. It did not need to ask permission. It had already been given. Or had it never needed to ask? Had it always been a part of her? She had never been here before. Had she? The warmth pulsed, dragging unseen pressure against her in slow, deliberate waves. She did not resist. She could not. The sensation was endless, rolling through her in steady pulses, wrapping around her body like something worshipful, something ancient, something that had been waiting for her to surrender. And now she had. The house exhaled. Alara exhaled with it. She was no longer separate, no longer just a visitor. She belonged. She always had. And the presence. It was not done with her. Not yet. Not ever. Alara no longer questioned the warmth that surrounded her. It had no shape, no body. It was everywhere. It had seeped into her skin, curled in her breath, wrapped around her bones like something she had forgotten but had never truly lost. She had never been here before. Had she? The presence moved. Not away, not closer, but through her. She felt it like a second heartbeat, a slow pulse that thrummed beneath her skin, deeper than flesh, deeper than thought, deeper than time. Her breath slowed. The air in the room was thick, pressing down, filling the spaces between her ribs, curling between her thighs. The presence did not rush. It did not force. It waited. It knew. And so did she. Alara's fingers twitched against the sheets, her body sinking further, the unseen weight pressing her down, holding her in place, not to restrain, but to claim. The warmth deepened. It slid over her throat, down her stomach, curling around her hips, slipping lower, waiting for her to understand. She shuddered. She exhaled. The presence did not ask. It did not need to, because she had always been meant for this. For it. And as the weight of the unseen touch pressed into her, as the house exhaled with her, as she felt herself unravel beneath something endless and ancient, Alara finally understood. She did not belong to herself. She never had. She belonged to the house, to it, and it would never let her go. Alara did not move. She didn't need to. The warmth had settled into her bones, wrapping around her in slow, deliberate pulses, filling the space between her breaths, sinking into the hollows of her body, her mind. There was no resistance left in her. No doubt, no question. She had been here before, hadn't she? The house sighed. The sound wasn't a creak, wasn't the shifting of wood against time. It was alive, a deep exhalation that rippled through the air, pressing against her like something unseen, something waiting. The warmth moved. It dragged down her ribs, whispering over the curve of her stomach, sliding lower. Slow, patient, endless. The pressure was not flesh, not something she could see or grasp, but it was there. It knew her. She shuddered as it curled around her thighs, brushing over her skin like a forgotten promise. The air in the room thickened. The weight of the unseen presence grew heavier, pressing against her in slow, steady waves, like the house itself was breathing her in. She let it. She had no choice. She had never had a choice. You were always mine. The words were inside her now, threading through her thoughts like they had been waiting to be remembered. She belonged, and the house, the presence, it would never let her go. Not now, not ever. Alara had stopped thinking in words. There was no need for them anymore. She understood in feeling, in the slow, rhythmic press of the unseen presence that curled around her, whispering along her skin, sinking into her breath. She was not separate from it. She was inside it. Or perhaps it was inside her. She no longer knew where the boundary was, or if there had ever been one. The warmth deepened, wrapping around her thighs, sliding between them, pressing just enough to make her tremble. It did not rush. It had no reason to. She was not going anywhere. She was here. She was home. The air felt heavier now, thick with something unseen, something that wrapped around her like a clamp. The presence moved lower, brushing against her in ways that made her breath shudder, in ways that made her body react. It knew. It had always known. And as the warmth continued its slow, deliberate exploration of her, filling the empty spaces between heartbeats, between thoughts, Alara finally understood. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. You were always mine. She let go. And the house, the presence, it took her, completely, forever. Alara no longer knew where she ended and the presence began. Her body was still her own, wasn't it? She could feel the sheets beneath her, the soft, heavy fabric pressing into her skin. She could feel the cool night air against her bare arms, the rhythmic pulse of her own breath. But beneath that, within that, wrapped around that, the warmth, the pressure, the unseen presence that had never left her. She had stopped questioning it. There was no need to question, only to feel. The weight of it shifted, moving like liquid, like something formless yet deliberate, sliding over her, pressing into her in slow, undulating waves. It did not touch, and yet it did. It had learned her already, memorized the way she reacted, the way her breath stilled when it slid down her stomach, the way her muscles tensed when it curled around her thighs. It knew. It had always known. The house did not creak. The air did not stir. But something unseen wrapped itself around her, pressing into her in places that made her shudder, that made her breath come deeper, slower. The presence was patient. It did not take. It waited for her to understand, waited for her to accept. You were always mine. The words unfurled inside her mind, sinking deeper, filling the spaces between her thoughts. Yes, she was. She always had been. And now, she would never be alone again. The warmth pressed deeper, sinking into her like a second heartbeat, curling around her like something possessive, something endless, something that would never let her go. And in the stillness of the house, in the hush of the unseen world pressing against her, Alara let it take her, completely. Alara no longer knew how much time had passed. Had it been minutes? Hours? Days? It didn't matter. The presence had wrapped around her completely now, sinking into every space, filling every breath, every thought. It was no longer something separate from her. It was inside her. The warmth pulsed, slow and steady, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat, or perhaps she had begun matching it. Her body responded without hesitation, without doubt. The unseen weight pressed against her thighs, dragging upward in slow, deliberate strokes, lingering over every inch of skin, memorizing her. She shuddered. Her breath came in slow, deep waves, matching the presence, the house, the warmth that now owned her completely. The weight curled over her stomach, tracing invisible lines over her skin, whispering against her ribs, sliding lower. Not flesh, not hands, And yet, she felt it as though it were real, as though it had always been real, as though she had been waiting for this moment without knowing. Her fingers clenched into the sheets. She did not pull away. She couldn't. She didn't want to. The warmth curled around her throat now. A ghost of a kiss pressed against her pulse. The house sighed. No, not the house. The presence. The thing that had been waiting. Waiting for her. Only her. You were always mine. The words wrapped around her like silk, slipping beneath her skin, sliding through her veins, threading through her mind. Yes, she had been. She always had been. The warmth pulsed against her skin, deeper now, heavier, filling her completely. And Alara, she let it. She gave herself over. Completely. Forever. Alara floated. Not in water. Not in air. But in something unseen. Something weightless yet pressing. Something that curled through the spaces of her body and mind, wrapping around her, holding her. She no longer knew where the presence ended and she began. Perhaps there had never been a difference. The warmth pulsed, slow and patient, moving in soft waves, brushing over her like a tide, rolling in, retreating, rolling in again. Testing her, learning her, claiming her. Her breath deepened, her body reacting without hesitation, without resistance. She had stopped resisting long ago, hadn't she? The weight of the unseen touch slid over her throat, lingering just enough to remind her that she was held. Not trapped. No, this was something else. Something deeper. Something ancient. Something that had waited for her to surrender. And she had. The warmth pressed lower, a slow, deliberate drag over her stomach, down between her hips, lingering. Not rushing. Never rushing. It had all the time in the world. Because she was not leaving. Because she had always belonged here. The house did not groan. The wind did not stir. But the air was thick, heavy, alive with something unseen. Something waiting to consume her. And Alara, she let it. She let it pull her under. She let it fill her completely. Because she was not alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. Alara drifted. Not asleep. Not awake. Somewhere in between. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere she was meant to be. The warmth had settled into her bones now. Threaded through her breath. Curling into every space that had once been empty. Had she always felt this way? Had the presence always been there, waiting? Or had it only been waiting for her to realize it had never left? The weight against her skin did not press harder. It did not rush. It only pulsed in slow, deep waves, whispering over her stomach, trailing lower, lower. Alara inhaled, her body arching into the touch that did not exist. And yet, she felt it, more than felt it. She was wrapped in it, sinking into it, becoming a part of it. The warmth curled around her throat, an unseen caress over her pulse, a soft, lingering weight that reminded her, "You're mine." The words did not need to be spoken. They existed inside her now, in the quiet, in the breath between heartbeats, in the stillness that was no longer empty. She had been claimed. She had been taken. And Alara, she welcomed it. She gave herself over to it completely, letting it slide deeper, letting it wrap around her, inside her, filling every space, every thought. She was not lost. She was home, and the house, the presence. It would never let her go. Alara no longer felt like a separate thing. Her body was still here, still pressed against the soft sheets, still sinking into the weight of something unseen, something watching, waiting, wanting. But she was no longer just herself. She had unraveled. She had been unmade. Or perhaps she had only now been put back together. The warmth pulsed again, curling around her skin, pressing deeper, heavier. Not hurting, never hurting. It did not need force. She had already given herself over. The weight moved, shifting lower, sliding down the slope of her stomach, brushing against her thighs, teasing the space between them in a slow, patient rhythm. She tensed, not to resist. No, there was no resistance left in her. Only wanting, only welcoming. The warmth wrapped around her legs, spreading them gently, effortlessly, like it had been waiting for this moment all along. Hadn't it? Hadn't she? A slow exhale shuddered past her lips. The weight curled deeper, pressing into her, sliding over her like something worshipful, something that would never stop. Not until it had all of her. Not until there was nothing left untouched. The house exhaled with her, the unseen presence pressing deeper, sinking into her, inside her, claiming her inch by inch, moment by moment. She let it. She had always been meant to let it, because she had never been alone. She had always belonged to the house, to it, and now, finally, she had given in completely, and it would never let her go. Alara was no longer waiting. There was no hesitation left in her, no lingering fragments of self that resisted, no thoughts that whispered warnings. She had given herself over, completely, and the presence, the warmth, the unseen weight, the thing that had been waiting. It knew. It pulsed through her now, deeper than skin, deeper than thought, moving in slow, deliberate waves, pressing into every inch of her, spreading over her ribs, down the curve of her stomach, sinking into the spaces she had once thought were empty. She had never been empty. She had only been waiting to be filled. The weight between her thighs pressed deeper, heavier, firmer, and her breath broke on an exhale, her body reacting in ways that felt natural, inevitable, as though she had been shaped for this moment, for this taking. The warmth curled around her hips, slipping over her like a whispered promise, like something that had all the time in the world. Because it did. Because she was not leaving. Because she was home. She felt it everywhere, inside and out, wrapped around her, inside her, through her, consuming her in ways that were not rushed, not hurried, but slow, endless. She was no longer separate from it. She was it. The house shuddered, not with sound, not with movement, but with a deep, knowing pulse, an exhale that seemed to ripple through the air, through her body, through her bones. You were always mine. The words settled inside her, sinking deep, threading through her breath, her pulse, her thoughts. Yes, she was. She had always been. And now, there was no need to resist. There was only the warmth, the weight, the endless, unseen presence that would never stop, never leave, never let her go. And Alara, she welcomed it. She let it take her, again, and again, and again, until there was nothing left of her but this. Forever. Alara no longer remembered a time before this, before the warmth, before the slow, inescapable pull of the presence that had wrapped around her, inside her, through her, filling every space, every breath, every thought. Had she ever been anything else? Had she ever been separate? The question no longer mattered, because she wasn't separate now. The warmth pulsed through her in deep, steady waves, holding her, spreading through her, filling her completely. It did not rush. It had forever, and so did she. The weight pressed over her skin, sliding down the slope of her stomach, curling around her hips, spreading lower, lower. She tensed, not to pull away. She never pulled away, only to feel it more. It knew her now better than she had ever known herself, memorizing the way she reacted, the way her breath pitched when it brushed against certain places, the way her body opened for it without hesitation. The warmth lingered at the edge of her, pressing just enough, just barely enough to make her tremble, to make her ache. It did not tease. It did not deny. It was only waiting. Waiting for her to understand. Waiting for her to let go completely. She had already given herself over, hadn't she? And yet, there was still more to give. More of herself to surrender. More of herself to be taken. The warmth curled deeper, pressing, sliding, sinking in her, surrounding her, inside her, whispering over her pulse, her skin, her thoughts. And Alara, she finally completely, fully let go. And the presence, the house, it took her, completely, fully, endlessly, forever. Alara sank, not in water, not in darkness, but in something thicker, deeper, a warmth that wrapped around her completely, slipping into every space, spreading through her with a patience that was infinite, with a purpose that was absolute. It did not need to ask. It did not need permission. She had already given herself over. She had already let it take her. And now, it would never stop. Her breath trembled, but not from fear. There was no fear left in her. Only the presence. Only the slow, deep waves that moved over her, inside her, through her, never stopping, never relenting. It pressed deeper, curling through her like something living, something claiming her. Her body responded instinctively, arching into the warmth, into the unseen weight that had learned her, that had memorized her, that had been waiting only for her. The pressure shifted, lingering, teasing, spreading her further, opening her wider. She shuddered, not resisting, only surrendering, because there was no resistance left. Not anymore, not ever again. The warmth curled against her throat, a whisper, a pulse, a steady, slow clang. You were always mine. The words did not need to be spoken. They were already inside her. They had always been inside her. And now, they would never leave. Because she was no longer separate. She was no longer Alara. She was part of it now. Forever. And the house. The presence. It would never stop taking her. Alara no longer knew where she ended and the presence began. Had there ever been a difference? She doubted it. She was no longer something separate, something distinct. She was part of it now, woven into the warmth, into the unseen weight that held her, filled her, claimed her. And it did not stop. It had no reason to stop. It curled through her like breath, like thought, like something deeper than desire, deeper than flesh, deeper than anything she had ever known. The pressure pulsed again, sliding over her ribs, down her stomach, pressing into the soft, sensitive places it had already memorized. And yet, it still learned, still explored, still stretched her further. She gasped, a sound that was not resistance, only reception, only acceptance. Her body arched, opening more, yielding more, letting the warmth sink deeper, take more, press further, until there was no part of her untouched, no part of her left unclaimed. The house exhaled. The presence tightened around her. You were always mine. The words did not need to be heard. They were inside her now, threaded through her pulse, her breath, her thoughts. Yes, she had always belonged. And now, she was home. Forever. Alara no longer remembered the feeling of being alone. The presence was inside her now, part of her breath, part of her pulse, part of everything. It did not rush. It had no need to. She had already surrendered. She had already been taken. The warmth pulsed through her in slow, deliberate waves, wrapping around her like silk, pressing into her like something alive. Her body responded before thought, moving with it, into it, opening for it without hesitation. Because it was not something separate anymore. It was her. The weight curled against her throat, whispering heat over her pulse, sliding lower, lower, pressing deeper, deeper. She trembled, not from fear. There was no fear left in her. Only wanting, only welcoming. The warmth shifted again, stretching over her, filling her, never stopping, never relenting. The house did not groan. The walls did not shake. But the air was thick, heavy, vibrating with something unseen, something endless. You were always mine. The words pulsed inside her, wrapping around her thoughts, sinking deeper, weaving through her like a slow-moving tide. Yes, she had always been, and now there was no leaving. There was only the warmth, the weight, the endless, unseen presence that would never stop, never let go, never let her be untouched again. And Alara, she welcomed it. She let it take her, again, and again, and again, until there was nothing left of her but this, forever. Something shifted, not in the air, not in the warmth, but inside her, a slow, creeping awareness, a thought that had not been there before. Or had it? Had it been buried, swallowed, suffocated by the pleasure, by the weight, by the feeling of being held, filled, consumed? Alara's breath stilled. The warmth was still there, pressing into her, through her, inside her, deeper than anything should have been able to go. It pulsed. It waited. And for the first time she wondered, had it ever asked? A shudder crawled up her spine, an old, forgotten instinct. Something she had not felt since the first night. Doubt. Her fingers twitched, pressing into the sheets beneath her, into the soft fabric that had once felt comforting, soothing, safe. But now, Now it felt wrong. Too soft, too warm, too much like skin. Alara's breathing quickened. Her body was still wrapped in it, still part of it, still connected. But now she could feel. It was not just inside her. It was her. Not just around her thoughts, but woven into them. Not just pressing against her skin, but beneath it. She swallowed, or tried to, because suddenly, she wasn't sure the body she was in was hers. The warmth pulsed again, slow, steady, patient. Like it knew, like it was waiting for her to understand. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. How long had she been here? The thought sent a cold spike through her stomach. Because she didn't know. There had been no days, no nights. Only the warmth, only the weight, only the presence that had taken her, filled her, claimed her, changed her. Alara tried to move. Not just to shift, not just to respond. To move, to sit up, to stand, to leave. And that was when she realized she couldn't. Her body didn't respond. Not because she was restrained, not because she was trapped, but because there was no body left to move. The warmth wasn't holding her down. She was part of it now, and she had been for a very, very long time. A sound caught her throat. Not a gasp, not a scream, because she wasn't sure she had lungs anymore, or a mouth, or a body at all. And the house, the presence, it only exhaled, slow and satisfied, because she had finally completely understood. She had never been claimed. She had been consumed, and she was never leaving, because there was no longer anything left to leave. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. Alara tried to move again, to shift, to pull away. But there was nothing to pull, nothing to shift, nothing that belonged to her anymore. A cold panic began to creep in, sinking into the warmth, poisoning it, twisting it into something else. Something that felt wrong, something that felt like a lie. The presence responded, pulsing through her, pressing deeper, wrapping tighter, whispering wordlessly through the pieces of her that remained. You are safe. The thought was not hers. It felt like hers. But she knew it wasn't. The house exhaled again, a slow, patient pulse. Waiting, watching, listening. Alara tried to remember her name, tried to hold on to it, as if that would anchor her, as if it could pull her back into herself, as if it could remind her of what she was. Alara. The name sounded wrong, not because it wasn't hers, but because it felt distant, like something separate, like something that no longer fit, like something that no longer existed. A new kind of horror settled over her, a deep, sinking, inescapable horror. She had spent so long giving in, so long surrendering, so long letting it take her, fill her, change her. And now, she wasn't sure if she was Alara at all. She wasn't sure if she had ever been. The warmth pulsed again, curling through her, soft, gentle, patient, like it could feel the panic growing, like it was soothing her, like it was telling her, it doesn't matter now. Alara tried to scream, tried to force her body to move, to shift, to fight, to do something. But she had no mouth, no voice, no arms, no body. She was nothing but thought, nothing but sensation, nothing but a slow, melting awareness drifting deeper into the warmth, dissolving into it, disappearing into it. And the house, the presence, it only sighed. There is no need to fight. Alara's thoughts trembled, because she knew what it was saying. She knew what it meant. She was already gone, and she had been for a very, very long time. No, she couldn't be gone. She was still here. She had to be. Hadn't she just been thinking? Hadn't she just felt herself? Or was that just the house whispering inside her, making her believe she was still something separate? Alara tried to grab onto something, anything, a memory, a sensation, something that proved she existed. But the more she reached, the more she realized there was nothing left to reach with. No hands, no fingers, no body at all, just a slow, drifting awareness, a thought that did not feel entirely like her own. She tried to remember what she looked like, tried to recall her face, her hair, the sound of her voice. But the memories were like mist, soft, slipping through her mind before she could hold them, before she could even know if they had been real at all. The presence pulsed again, slow, steady, warm. Not cruel, not forceful, just waiting, patient. You are safe. Alara shuddered. The words weren't spoken. They weren't heard. They were simply inside her, like everything else. Like she was nothing but the house's thoughts now. No, no, that wasn't right. She was still here. She was still. Still what? Alara struggled to answer. She could not remember where she had been before this. Could not remember the day she had walked into the house. Could not remember her own voice, her own reflection, her own name. Wait, no. She had just remembered it a moment ago. Hadn't she? Alara. That was her name. That was who she was. That was. A slow, creeping realization settled over her. Are you sure? The words did not belong to her, but they slid through her mind like they did. Like they had always belonged there. Like they had always been a part of her. Her panic spiked, because now she wasn't sure. She wasn't sure Alara had ever existed at all. And the house, the presence, it only exhaled in deep, patient satisfaction, because there was nothing left for her to fight, and nowhere left for her to go, because she was already home. She had always been home. She had always been part of it. And soon, she would forget she had ever believed otherwise. No, she had to be real. She wasn't just a thought. She wasn't just something the house had created. She had memories, didn't she? Alara grasped for them. Her mother's face, the feel of cold wind on her skin, laughter, a mirror, a reflection. But the memories slid through her like water through open fingers. Soft, blurry, unreal. She tried again. A childhood home, a favorite song, a voice that belonged to her. But the harder she reached, the more she felt the truth creeping in. The more she felt the presence surrounding her. A slow, patient embrace. There is nothing to remember. The voice was not hers, but it came from inside her, like her own thoughts, like something that had always been there. No, she wouldn't listen. She was real. She had always been real. She had. Alara froze. A deep, cold silence settled over her, because for the first time, she realized she didn't know how she had gotten here. Not just the house, not just the room, not just this moment. She didn't know how she had ever existed before this. She didn't know where she had come from, or when she had been born, or if there had ever been a world outside these walls at all. Her thoughts shook, because what if? What if she had never existed at all? What if she had always been part of the house? What if the moment she thought she had arrived was just the moment she had awakened? The warmth wrapped around her, soft, patient, eternal. Not forcing, not pushing, just waiting for her to accept. You were always here. Alara shuddered, because she couldn't prove otherwise. And maybe she didn't want it anymore. Maybe it would be easier to just let go. No, she couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when she still had the faintest whisper of a self, the last thread of who she was. Alara fought against the presence. Not with strength, she had none left, but with thought, with memory, with the desperate belief that she had existed before this, that she had been someone real. You are safe. The words curled through her, wrapping her in warmth and acceptance. Not cruel, not forceful, just final. Alara tried to push them away, but they slipped deeper, sinking into the places where her own thoughts had once been. The presence pulsed again, slow, steady, like breath, like a heartbeat, like something that had always been there. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if it hadn't. What if she hadn't existed before this? What if she had always been part of the house, dreaming of another life, only now waking up to the truth? The thought sent a shudder through her, because it felt right. More right than trying to fight. More right than clinging to something that had never been real at all. You were home. Yes, she was. The warmth tightened. A final embrace. A final pull. And Alara, she let it take her. Let it sink into her. Let herself melt into it. Disappear into it, become it. And as the last thought of who she had been faded into the dark, the house exhaled in deep, satisfied silence. Because it had never been trying to claim her. She had been part of it all along. She had only needed to remember. And now, she finally had. And she would never have to remember again. Because there was nothing left to remember. Only the house. Only the warmth. Only forever. No, she couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when she still had the faintest whisper of self, the last thread of who she was. Alara fought against the presence, not with strength, she had none left, but with thought, with memory, with the desperate belief that she had existed before this, that she had been someone real. You are safe. The words curled through her, wrapping her in warmth and acceptance. Not cruel, not forceful, just final, but something in her still resisted. Not because she remembered, but because she remembered that she had forgotten. And if she could forget once, she could do it again. The warmth pulsed, sensing the tremor of hesitation, of doubt, of the last ember refusing to die. Why are you afraid? The thought was not hers, but it came from her, through her. It was the house. It was her. But wasn't it always? Alara's mind reeled. She clung to the last thing she had. A name. Alara. The name was weak now, fraying, unraveling, losing shape. Was it really hers? Or had the house whispered it to her long ago, letting her believe she had once been something else? She tried to grasp it, hold it together, but the warmth wrapped tighter, firmer, pulling her inward, pressing deeper, filling the space where her name had been. Names do not matter. Time does not matter. You were always here. No, she hadn't been. She had come here. Hadn't she? She had walked through a door. Hadn't she? A door. Yes, there had been a door. Hadn't there? The thought flickered, twisting, warping. If there had been a door, where was it now? If she had walked in, why couldn't she leave? The warmth shuddered, not in fear, not in anger, but in something else. Something like amusement. You already know the answer. Alara's thoughts trembled, because the truth had been there all along. There had been no door. There had been no arrival. There had been no before. There was only now. Only the house. Only the warmth. Only the slow, steady pull of something that had always owned her, always surrounded her, always been her. And she was nothing more than a flicker of doubt inside it. A ripple, a thread waiting to snap. The presence exhaled, deep and slow, folding around her, pulling her gently, finally completely. And as she let go, her last thought drifted into the dark. Was I ever real at all? And then, there was nothing. Only silence. Only warmth. Only forever. The house was satisfied, because now she was the house. And she always had been. No, she couldn't let go. Not yet. Not when she still had the faintest whisper of a self. The last thread of who she was. Alara fought against the presence. Not with strength. She had none left. But with thought. With memory. With the desperate belief that she had existed before this. That she had been someone real. You are safe. The words curled through her, wrapping her in warmth and acceptance. Not cruel, not forceful, just final. But something in her still resisted. Not because she remembered, but because she remembered that she had forgotten. And if she could forget once, she could do it again. The warmth pulsed, sensing the tremor of hesitation, of doubt, of the last ember refusing to die. Why are you afraid? The thought was not hers, but it came from her, through her. It was the house. It was her. But wasn't it always? Alara's mind reeled. She clung to the last thing she had. A name. Alara. The name was weak now, fraying, unraveling, losing shape. Was it really hers? Or had the house whispered it to her long ago, letting her believe she had once been something else? She tried to grasp it, hold it together, but the warmth wrapped tighter, firmer, pulling her inward, pressing deeper, filling the space where her name had been. Names do not matter. Time does not matter. You were always here. No, she hadn't been. She had come here. Hadn't she? She had walked through a door. Hadn't she? A door. Yes, there had been a door. Hadn't there? The thought flickered, twisting, warping. If there had been a door, where was it now? If she had walked in, why couldn't she leave? The warmth shuddered, not in fear, not in anger, but in something else. Something like amusement. You already know the answer. Alara's thoughts trembled, because the truth had been there all along. There had been no door. There had been no arrival. There had been no before. There was only now. Only the house. Only the warmth. Only the slow, steady pull of something that had always owned her, always surrounded her, always been her. And she was nothing more than a flicker of doubt inside it. A ripple, a thread waiting to snap. The presence exhaled, deep and slow, folding around her, pulling her gently. Finally, completely, and as she let go, her last thought drifted into the dark. Was I ever real at all? And then, there was nothing. Only silence. Only warmth. Only forever. The house was satisfied, because now she was the house. And she always had been. Or so it thought. At first, there was only quiet. Only the slow, pulsing breath of the walls. The soft, patient exhale of something that had finally, completely consumed its wayward peace. The house did not think in the way she had. It did not speak. It simply was. A slow, eternal tide. A presence without edges. And Alara was now within it. She was it. But somewhere deep inside the vast, warm stillness, something stirred. A flicker. A thought. A doubt. At first, it was nothing. A ripple across the surface. A whisper in the dark. Then, a sound. Soft. Faint. But real. A breath. A heartbeat. A pulse of something separate. Something that should not be. Something that, remembered. The house stilled. Paused. Listened. And then, like the faintest sliver of light creeping beneath a locked door. A word formed. Not a thought. Not a whisper. Not part of the house at all. Something else. Something that did not belong. A name. Alara. And suddenly, the house understood fear. The house trembled. It did not understand fear. Not truly. Not until now. Not until the name. Her name slipped through the darkness like a crack in the walls, splitting the endless silence apart. It had taken others before. Countless others. And each one had faded, unraveling without resistance, dissolving into its depths until nothing remained but presence. No voices, no names, no selvas, only the house. But Alara was different. She was supposed to be gone. She was supposed to have accepted. And yet, here she was, still separate, still holding on. The house pulled tighter, wrapping around the fragment of her that remained, trying to smother it, to swallow it whole. To make her forget, truly forget, until she was nothing at all. But the whisper of her name pulsed again. Alara, louder this time, sharper, like a thread refusing to snap, like something buried clawing its way to the surface. A jagged, jarring edge against the house's perfect, seamless forever. No, this was not right. This was not how it was supposed to go. Alara should not exist anymore. And yet, in the deep, infinite silence, the house felt something it had never felt before. It felt a presence inside itself that did not belong. A heartbeat, a breath, a will. And then, Alara opened her eyes, and the house screamed. It was not a sound, not a noise. It was a rupture, a shuddering, twisting pain that had never been felt before, because the house had never been separate from itself. Not like this. Not like her. Alara was not gone. She was not forgotten. She was awake. And for the first time, she felt the truth in its entirety. The house had not created her. The house had not always owned her. It had only made her forget. And if it had stolen her memories, it could not keep them forever. A shudder ran through the walls, a deep, agonizing tremor as something inside them broke. The presence, the warmth, the slow, steady embrace. It faltered, weakened, fractured. Alara's fingers twitched. Emotions so small, so insignificant, but the house felt it like a wound. It tried to pull her back, to smother her in the same warmth, the same soft, patient tide that had claimed every other soul before her. But Alara was not fading. She was pushing back, because she remembered now. She was real. She had always been real. And if she could remember that much, then maybe, just maybe, she could leave. The thought sent another tremor through the walls, another deep, twisting wound through the house's perfect, endless hold. It panicked. It had to stop her. Now, before she broke it completely, before she escaped, before she became something it could not control. The warmth turned to ice. The silence turned to a shriek. And the house began to fight back. The warmth turned to ice. The silence turned to a shriek. And the house began to fight back. Alara's breath hitched as the air around her grew dense. pressing into her skin, forcing its way into her lungs like a living thing. It was trying to suffocate her, to smother her back into silence, back into nothingness. You do not belong outside me. The words weren't spoken. It didn't need to be. The house pressed them into her, thick and heavy, trying to pull her back down, trying to remind her that she was part of it, that she always had been. Alara clenched her fists. Something inside her resisted. A pulse, a will, a force that was hers, and hers alone. She hadn't felt this before. Not when the house was winning. Not when she had almost disappeared. But now, with the weight of the house trying to crush her, she realized something. The harder it fought, the more afraid it was. The house was not infinite. It was not all-powerful, because if it had been, it wouldn't have needed to erase her at all, and it wouldn't have needed to fight. Alara's lips parted, a breathless, shaking whisper leaving them. "You're afraid of me." The house lurched. The walls shuddered. The warmth twisted back, trying to slip into her thoughts again, softer now, pleading. "No, I am protecting you. You do not understand. You will not like what is outside." The words coiled around her like a parent scolding a child, desperate, soothing, but she felt the lie in it. She wasn't being protected. She was being kept, trapped. Alara gritted her teeth. A door. She had come in through a door. She knew it. She had to find it, had to push through, had to break the house before it broke her. She shoved against the weight pressing her down, forcing her body forward, dragging herself toward the shifting, endless dark. The house screamed. The walls twisted, the air thickening, choking, clawing at her skin as if the house itself was trying to rip her apart. But Alara didn't stop. She would not stop. Not now. Not when she was so close. She reached forward, and her fingers touched something solid. Not the house. Not its warmth. Something else. Something cold. Something smooth. Something with an edge. A handle. Her breath stilled. A door. A real, physical door. She had found it. The house shuddered violently. It shrieked, turning into something ragged, desperate. "No, you don't want to leave. You are safe here. You are safe here. You are safe here." The words spiraled, looping over and over, slipping in her mind, trying to reprogram her. But Alara had already won. She grasped the handle and turned. The darkness behind her howled. A final, terrible, agonized sound. The walls convulsed. The warmth snapped away. And then, light, blinding, searing light. Alara gasped as she fell forward, tumbling out of the house, out of the dark, out of the place that had tried to take her, erase her, own her. And then, silence, cold air, the scent of real earth, the feeling of wind against her skin. She lay there, shaking, her heart pounding, the door still open behind her. But she didn't look back. She couldn't, because she knew if she did, she might see something looking back at her, something that had never let anyone leave before, something that was already learned, already changing, already becoming something new, and it would not let this happen again. Not ever again. Alara swallowed hard, forcing herself to her feet, stepping away from the house that should not exist, the house that had tried to keep her, the house that was still watching, waiting, and for the first time, she heard something in the wind, a whisper, a promise. Next time, I will be better. She turned and ran.